the way back to COVID-19, ground zero. Was there a cover-up? From the wet market all the way to government, a shocking story. When it really began.
The authorities in Wuhan haven't been honest with the world.
There has been cover-up.
A Sky News Australia special.
Hundreds dead, thousands infected across multiple continents, millions quarantined with whole cities in lockdown. But how did the coronavirus spread so quickly? We're going to trace the virus day by day over the first month of the outbreak, following its path from patient zero in China to across the world, and what might happen next. As people everywhere celebrate the start of a new decade, the World Health Organization is told that a handful of people in the city of Wuhan in China had pneumonia, with no other clear causes or origin. But there's one common theme that connects the patients: Hunan Seafood Wholesale Market. Many of these first cases are linked to workers at the market selling live fish, birds and other animals. As a precaution, the market is shut on January the 1st. Nearly a week later, on January the 7th, Chinese authorities say they've identified the cause of the pneumonia, a new virus in the wider coronavirus group, which includes the common cold and SARS. Now this sparks serious concerns. 17 years ago, the SARS epidemic began in China and went on to kill 800 people. The new virus is temporarily named 2019 nCoV, but becomes popularly known as the coronavirus.
今天，湖北武汉市卫健委
2 days later, on January the 9th, the first death is confirmed, a 61-year-old man. He was a regular visitor to the market in Wuhan. By now, 41 people are known to be infected with the virus. At this stage, Wuhan's Health Commission says there's no evidence the virus could spread between humans. Yet by week 2, the new novel coronavirus isn't just affecting China. On January the 13th, Thailand reports its first case. Now, to understand how and why the infection spread, it's key to look at the timing of it. Reports of the first death in China came just before Chinese New Year, the country's biggest holiday and a time when millions are travelling all across the country and abroad. As planes left Wuhan airport, so too did the virus. On the 15th of January, Japan reports its first case. Then on the 20th of January, South Korea does too. On the same day that South Korea reports its first case, it's confirmed the coronavirus can pass from person to person. And official figures become clearer as the World Health Organization starts to publish daily reports. This is when the numbers erupt, with 282 cases reported from 4 countries. The next day, 314 cases are confirmed, including 16 healthcare workers. It then jumps to 581, with the majority still in China on January the 23rd. With the numbers rising, the city of Wuhan is put under quarantine.
This is usually a very busy street. Another beautiful day in quarantine Wuhan.
Anyone in public is told to wear a face mask, and the Chinese government sends 300,000 extra masks to help. Then, at 2 a.m, it's announced that all public transport is to be shut down, and anyone wanting to leave the city has 8 hours before all exits are closed. From 10 a.m, Wuhan, a city with a population bigger than London, is in lockdown. A brand new 1,000-bed hospital begins to be built to treat the virus, with the aim of completing the whole thing in just a matter of days. China has history here. In the midst of the SARS epidemic in 2003, as Beijing battled severe acute respiratory syndrome, a new facility for patients was constructed in just 1 week. Almost a month after first learning about the virus, on the 30th of January, the WHO now declares a public health emergency, with the main reason being its global spread. Away from China, there are now 82 cases in 18 countries, but no deaths outside of China yet. And in Germany, Japan, Vietnam, France, and the United States, people who have been to China are now infecting those who haven't. Come the last day in January, the virus spreads to England, where 2 members of the same family test positive. In China, meanwhile, there are now 2,000 new cases in just the last 24 hours, and the virus has now reached every state in the country, bringing the worldwide total to 9,800 cases across 21 countries.
The biggest quarantine in history right now taking place in China. I think you're going to see that more amplified now as a result of this declaration.
The United States declares a public health emergency, and says that it will begin temporarily suspending entry for foreign nationals who have travelled to China in the last 14 days. That's against the advice of the WHO. Yet there have still been no deaths outside China. Come the start of the month, 3 more countries report having the virus, bringing the total to 24. Following on from the United States lead, Australia says it will also refuse entry to all non-citizens arriving from China. Australian nationals coming from China will be quarantined for 2 weeks, something the UK, South Korea, Singapore and New Zealand are beginning to also do as they evacuate citizens from China and monitor them for symptoms.
We have arrived at quarantine.
On Sunday, the 2nd of February, the first death is reported outside of mainland China. A 44-year-old Chinese man from Wuhan dies of the virus in the Philippines. And then by February the 4th, a second death outside the Chinese mainland was confirmed in Hong Kong. So looking back from the start of the year to February the 11th, the novel coronavirus has infected more than 43,000 people globally, the majority of those in China. And the Chinese authorities now say it's caused the death of more than 1,000 people in the country, although the number of new infections day by day has begun to decline. That means more people have died from the novel coronavirus than they did during the SARS outbreak in China. But is it as deadly? And what does the first month of this outbreak tell us about the nature of the coronavirus? Currently, experts believe the virus has killed around 3% of those it has infected. That's a lower death rate than SARS, which had a mortality rate of just under 10%, and other diseases like Ebola, which kills around 50% of those it infects. However, coronavirus has infected more than 5 times as many people as SARS ever did. So crucially, what might happen next? A lot depends on how well the virus is contained.
What we can use right now are what are called non-pharmaceutical interventions, preventing mass gatherings, potentially closing schools, potentially even introducing travel restrictions. It's going to be a real challenge to contain it.
The Chinese have been applauded by the WHO for their response to the virus, with the Director General saying they have set a new standard for their reaction to the outbreak.
The speed with which China detected the outbreak, isolated the virus, sequenced the genome, and shared it with WHO and the world are very impressive.
Now, the Chinese have admitted to their own shortcomings in their initial dealings with the virus. In the first few days and weeks, officials have been accused of downplaying the severity of the virus. A doctor in Wuhan tried to warn colleagues late in December, and he was accused by authorities of spreading false information, although they later apologised. Then, in early February, the doctor himself was killed by the very virus he tried to warn against, sparking outrage at the Chinese government. Many experts now believe that by not alerting the public and healthcare professionals much earlier, a crucial opportunity was lost to stop the disease from becoming an epidemic. The coronavirus has been contained to an extent by widespread health interventions. That means quarantining those infected to stop the spread. That relies on huge international cooperation and identifying who's infected, where they've been, and who could have also got it. Countries are already making huge steps to control it, like monitoring airports, banning travel, and isolating patients. But these methods rely on the virus only spreading when people show symptoms, something which scientists are unsure about. Another way it could end is simply by a vaccine or a cure. Researchers in multiple countries are trying to find a vaccine, but at the moment there isn't one, and it could be months or even a year before there's a breakthrough. What we do know is that the major risk comes from the virus spreading to countries who do not have as advanced healthcare systems. These countries would be less able to cope with an outbreak and less effective at quarantining and controlling the spread.
Our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems and which are ill prepared to deal with it.
The key message from the WHO is to prepare all countries for the possibility of an outbreak and to ensure they are ready to contain it. The WHO also says that the world is still not ready for a global pandemic, that often we operate on a, quote, cycle of panic and neglect. So basically, we throw money at problems when they break out, but do nothing to ensure we're prepared to prevent the next one.
The world remains dangerously unprepared for a global pandemic. For too long, the world has operated on a cycle of panic and neglect. We throw money at an outbreak, And when it's over, we forget about it and do nothing to prevent the next one. This is dangerously short-sighted and frankly difficult to understand. If we fail to prepare, we're preparing to fail.
As China and other countries continue to try to contain the virus, what's the best advice for you regarding the outbreak? The Department of Health in the UK has called the coronavirus a serious and imminent threat to public health, but the overall risk in the UK remains moderate. For those of you who visited China, Thailand, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia or Macau in the last 14 days and have a cough, fever or difficulty breathing, Public Health England says you must contact your GP by phone. A number of experts have said there's no need for the general public to wear masks in places where the risk of infection is low. The current WHO infection control advice for the general public does not mention masks or goggles, focusing instead on hand washing, covering the mouth while sneezing, and avoiding raw and undercooked food.
To stop transmission of this virus, it's very important that sick people wear masks. That's for clear. For people who have no symptoms, the mask will not necessarily protect them 100% because if they don't apply other measures, it's not sufficient. So my message is more that mask alone is not enough. It's a package of measures that you have to put in place, and if people use the entire package, it's fine. If they just use mask, I think it's not enough.
So that's how the novel coronavirus went from an unknown infection in a market in Wuhan to a global health scare that has dominated news headlines for most of 2020. What comes next depends on how countries around the world cooperate to ensure the virus is contained.
More than 50,000 people are dead and thousands more are fighting for their lives. COVID-19 is a near unstoppable killer. The virus has ravaged nations, devastated economies, turned bustling cities into ghost towns. No nation has escaped its destructive grip, and it appears the worst may be yet to come. But could all of this have been avoided? Could the coronavirus pandemic, which has upended all our lives, have been prevented? Tonight, Sky News can reveal new information which suggests Chinese authorities knew about the virus much earlier than they've admitted. Those inside China tell us this information was deliberately withheld. That the communist government is continuing to lie about the coronavirus's impact, and that the deaths of thousands of people may have been covered up. We'll also take you around the world and hear from experts and those living in the COVID-19 hotspots to explore how the nations most affected responded to the pandemic. What's worked, what's failed, what's likely to happen next, and how we win this global war. Factories are back up and running. And construction workers are back on site. Life, it seems, is returning to normal at the birthplace of COVID-19. The lockdown of Wuhan in China has been loosened. It'll be lifted on Wednesday, and authorities there are celebrating what they see as their successful battle against the deadly virus. But we're now learning just how irresponsible they've been, the cover-ups and the apparent disregard for human life which may have led to the deaths of thousands of people.
We could have been better off if China had been more forthcoming.
The virus, now known as COVID-19, was believed to have originated in this Wuhan exotic animal market, transmitted from a bat to a human. It spread like wildfire. Hundreds were infected within days. Doctors who tried to alert authorities were harassed and ignored. Some have even disappeared. The Chinese government claims the first coronavirus case was identified around December 31. But official documents indicate that's an outright lie.
From the classified government record that we have seen, what we have found is that there are actually cases in November.
Investigative reporter Josephine Ma says the classified documents she's seen state Chinese authorities knew of a case of an infected 55-year-old from Hubei province on November 17. That's 6.5 weeks before Chinese Communist Party leaders alerted the World Health Organization. During that time, hundreds were infected.
Before 20th of January, there was like cover-up, of course. From the information we saw, like in 2019, there were already like over 200 cases.
The infamous lockdown of Wuhan then came much too late. The horse had already bolted. The virus surely would have spread beyond the city of 11 million and likely beyond China's borders.
From my research, there was actually 5 million people in the Wuhan area where the centre of the outbreak was that had left in the 2 weeks before the lockdown there. So if you think about those 5 million people, they have gone all around the world and they have just spread the illness.
And residents of Wuhan say there's another cover-up going on. The government claims around 2,500 have died here. But records of hundreds of deaths may have been kept secret. Wuhan social media users say all 7 of the city's funeral homes have been delivering hundreds of urns each day.
One Chinese media report talked to a truck driver, and that driver said he has delivered 5,000 urns to that funeral home, and that is one of the 8 funeral homes in Wuhan. And 5,000 alone is much bigger than the official number of deaths.
And stunningly, Wuhan's wet markets, which experts believe are a breeding ground for potential viruses, are still operating.
It boggles my mind how when we have so many diseases that emanate out of that unusual human-animal interface, that we don't just shut it down.
We do know that there are laboratories researching coronaviruses within just a few miles of that food market. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is going to great lengths to conceal what happened in those laboratories.
By fudging figures and lying to the world, some have argued the Chinese Communist Party is to blame for the incredible spread of this deadly virus and the deaths of tens of thousands of people.
If you look at the British government's response, a number of senior politicians have said China's day of reckoning needs to happen very quickly with regard to this virus.
The virus soon crossed a continent. 8,000 kilometres from Wuhan, COVID-19 wrought chaos. An Italian returning from China is believed to have brought it to the north of Italy. Doctors reportedly misdiagnosed dozens of patients who had the virus. And in a misguided attempt to prevent racism, and despite the obvious risk of coronavirus spread, the mayor of Florence declared a Hug a Chinese Person Day. Groups in Milan did similar stunts.
No, un abbraccio va benissimo, grazie.
A regional lockdown was later declared. It failed miserably as panicked residents defied orders and travelled south. COVID-19 spread across the country, killing at least 11,500 people.
The age profile of their population, there's 23% of the Italian population is over 65. And so when they have had an outbreak of this size, their larger age population is the reason why that some of this death toll was actually up to 10%, whereas Germany's is on current figures about 0.6%. The other factor that I think is been underreported is in Italy, there are just far too few tests. They have more people in the community that actually have this illness than what they realise. And I've spoken to doctors in Italy where they're going around doing home visits to COVID-19 patients. they actually have had to don full protective gear to actually go and check that those people have the oxygen they need. And they're saying that, to me, that there is no way the numbers are real, because they must be much, much higher, because only people who get to hospital are being tested.
This small-town parish priest deals with death on an industrial scale.
Non sapevano più dove metterli.
Authorities no longer knew where to put the coffins. The saddest thing is that these dead were put so naked, so alone.
For 5 weeks, Rome's streets have been empty. There's barely a soul at its centuries-old landmarks amid the government-ordered nationwide lockdown. School teacher Marzio Toniolo watches the Pope's addresses from home these days. His mum and dad are nearing 90 and a pandemic is at his door. Marzio's prayers are pretty simple.
The situation isn't that great. We are just thinking about surviving.
The spread here appears to have slowed, and the statistics suggest the country may already have passed its peak of COVID-19 cases. Italy illustrates the dangers of late, uncoordinated and localised measures.
I think what it highlights is that we need to think about elements of national coordination in when you are responding to outbreak, alerting and enhancing your surveillance system early on throughout the country, activating all mechanisms that bring together a strong outbreak response.
Where Italy failed, South Korea excelled. The nation, right on China's doorstep, is one of the few seemingly winning the war against COVID-19. Going from 900 new cases each day to around 50, all without locking down cities. The success is all in the preparation and testing. South Korea boasts the world's most expansive, well-organised system.
It spans everyone from sort of mild symptoms to more serious symptoms in folks who've been in contact at various degrees to infected people.
At least 300,000 people have been swabbed in medical centres, their cars, and even revamped telephone booths. The government learnt the lessons from the 2003 SARS and 2015 MERS outbreaks.
They learnt lessons that were absorbed within the country and were used to strengthen their health system. They also had very good and clear communication from the government, so twice daily briefing to the community, which helped the community understand the scale of the outbreak.
Experts credit Singapore's tracking system with its impressive numbers.
Singapore has been one of the more successful models for dealing with the pandemic, and the primary kind of strategy for Singapore has been to trace and isolate. So from the beginning, there's been a large team of people in Singapore responsible for finding the people that are sick, for doing the contact tracing, isolating close contacts of infected people, and just making sure that the chain of transmission stops.
Publicly available databases list the number of cases and basic details of patients, and local maps show where the coronavirus clusters are.
So from the beginning, Singapore's approach was to put all of that information out there so that people know the extent of the spread and can understand and grasp the nature of what's happening, in the hope that that would result in calm rather than panic, and to an extent that's worked.
Experts predict South Korea may be the first Asian nation to become COVID-19 free. France is in lockdown. Its health system simply can't cope with the coronavirus's incredible spread. 4,000 people have already died here. Firefighters were ordered to help overstretched ambulance crews. And by chopper and train, critical patients are being moved to hospitals outside the country. Medical intern Elodie Vieira has been thrust onto the front lines.
It's something out of the ordinary, so we're never ready for this. But we have no choice. It's part of the job and we're here to help. We do what we can.
It's not clear why France was impacted so severely, or if anything could have been done to prevent it reaching such a scale. French officials declared shutdowns relatively early, yet still allowed municipal elections to go ahead in March. The situation is likely to get much worse before it gets better. The countrywide lockdown Australia has so far avoided was enacted in the UK a week ago.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
3 days after that address, the PM himself tested positive for COVID-19. The British public kept calm, carried on, and have been a little creative while stuck at home, with social media challenges and street dances.
It's not unusual to see me cry. I wanna die.
Life in lockdown in London is extraordinarily boring, but also a little bit frightening. Every day we're watching new numbers come through of the death toll, and it's really hard to get your head around just how many people have been affected.
The lockdown replaced the British authorities' initial plan to do partial shutdowns so the country could develop a herd immunity. Some experts say the current measures aren't strict enough.
The airports are still open and flights are inbound from places such as Italy, Spain and China. So big questions are being asked to Boris Johnson, which suggests, why are we, the British people, in lockdown, where seemingly people are arriving every day, not being tested in the airport, and then walking into the country, potentially bringing the virus in?
Temporary hospitals have opened in several UK cities.
Looks like we're going to have a very busy few months. At the minute, we've breached our capacity in intensive care, so we've got over 16 patients now in intensive care. Our normal capacity will be 13 ventilated patients. And we've gone into the operating theatres now, so we've got another 3 ventilated patients in the operating theatres.
Critics claim recent cuts to public health funding hurt Britain's ability to deal with a pandemic, and too few doctors are being tested for COVID-19. But Britain's National Health Service appears able to effectively deal with the coming peak in coronavirus cases, which some experts predict may occur over Easter. This may have condemned Spain to its worst health crisis in generations.
And it was a present for Saul.
67,000 people crammed into a stadium in the Spanish capital to watch Atletico Madrid take on Liverpool. 3 weeks after authorities knew of a coronavirus outbreak in Spain. A Spanish health official told the public the country would only have a handful of cases. Spain now has the second biggest COVID-19 death toll. Per capita, more than 4 times worse than China. And health workers say it may be much worse than officials are letting on.
Health workers are exhausted physically and emotionally because this is awful. This is an inferno. The numbers that I'm seeing on television are false. Why are they false? Because they are not testing people. We need to appropriate tools. We're always out of staff, and now suddenly we don't have enough jobs to post. Right now, there's no health worker who doesn't have the job. You should have hired them when it was still useful.
The pandemic laid bare Spain's systemic healthcare problems and authorities' lack of preparedness and general negligence. The crisis here is far from over. and it's only just begun in the land of the free.
This is going to be a rough 2 or 3 weeks. This is going to be one of the roughest 2 or 3 weeks we've ever had in our country. We're going to lose thousands of people.
The United States has more cases of COVID-19 than any other nation.
The Defense Department is now looking to procure an extra 100,000 body bags. Last week alone, 6.6 million more Americans filed for unemployment, and more than 90% of Americans now under stay-home orders.
And New York is ground zero for the US outbreak.
Waking up in the morning and walking into the hospital can feel like walking into the fire.
We're running out of medications, we're running out of equipment, and we're even running out of oxygen.
Our Commander-in-Chief has declared war on COVID-19, so it is a wartime footing that we're on, and we are treating this like a large military campaign.
The city's running out of room to treat the deluge of severe cases. Some patients have been sent to a temporary hospital in Central Park and a docked Navy ship.
They're anticipating that of all of these extra hospitals, including ones that have been converted from convention centres and other buildings, are just going to be jam-packed within a matter of days.
Lauren Few is infected but relieved.
I mean, I was just kind of like, whoa, that's crazy. And honestly, I was just sort of like, well, I'm glad I know and that I've been isolating just in case. I will say, like, the next day, I felt more anxiety about it. Like, when I was still coughing, like I was getting a little short of breath.
New York, California, and several other states have ordered lockdowns. Governors are fighting for federal government supplies and support.
Trump tweeting today that the federal government is only a backup for states and that the complainers should have been stocked up and ready long before this crisis hit. But governors say the federal government is now competing with them to buy those supplies, forcing them to bid against each other and FEMA.
I am asking healthcare professionals across the country, if you don't have a healthcare crisis in your community, please come help us in New York now. We need relief.
This, as the nation's second largest city, tells people to wear masks.
But when you have to go out, we are recommending that we use non-medical grade masks or facial coverings and not take the ones that are reserved for our first responders.
The US doesn't have a universal healthcare system. Americans' access to healthcare typically depends on their employment. US media have reported many people who may have been infected were concerned about medical costs and didn't seek help, worsening the outbreak.
I hope very much that out of this terrible, terrible tragedy, we do some fundamental rethinking about the nature of American society.
Getting the uninsured access to the care they need is a top priority for President Trump. We are already rolling out the $1 billion in funding from the Families First Coronavirus Response Act to cover providers' expenses for testing and diagnosing the uninsured.
Some have blamed Donald Trump for the scale of the current crisis. Critics claim the president was asleep at the wheel, that he implemented travel restrictions and sent federal aid far too late. They say he repeatedly dismissed concerns about a US outbreak as COVID-19 was ravaging multiple nations.
The virus that we're talking about having to do, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat, as the heat comes in. Typically that will go away in April.
Almost everybody that we see is getting better, and it could be everybody too.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. And this is their new hoax.
This was an unexpected, once in history event, and they got off to a rocky start, President Trump as well as the federal government. But they've since found their footing. More than half of all of Americans now approve of President Trump's job in handling the coronavirus crisis.
The coronavirus crisis could cost Trump his job. His biggest success as president has been in boosting the economy and employment. The pandemic has put pay to those achievements months out from the presidential election.
President Trump has an enormous opportunity to respond to this crisis, respond to it well, beat expectations in terms of the number of sick and dead, and bring the economy back to where it was. If he's able to do that, he will actually end up being in a stronger position.
The prognosis is bleak for the United States. Experts predict COVID-19 will kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. Doctors have warned they may not have enough supplies to meet demand, that they'll soon be forced to decide who gets treated and who gets left to die.
There are already reports coming out that that's already happening, that there are some people needing ventilators who are disabled or have a lesser likelihood of survival, who are being left alone for people who have coronavirus who are more likely to survive, because there are just so many numbers now. Look, it's scary. It really is. There's no two ways about that. The cases having gone from a handful to what they are now has happened so rapidly that it's really taken a while for, I think, most people to get their heads around the gravity of it. And to think that we're not even at the peak right now is probably, I think, the part that's really scaring most people, and also making most of them actually obey the stay-at-home orders. But look, nobody really knows what's going to happen, and I think that's the part that is most worrisome.
From the US to the UK, Australia to Zimbabwe, COVID-19 has spared no nation. Its impact made much worse by the Chinese government's deceit. This is the first coronavirus pandemic the world has seen. It likely won't be the last.
We should start looking forward to understand how this experience is going to change us, or how it should change us, because this is going to be transformative. It is going to be transformative on a personal basis, on a social basis, on a systems basis. We're never going to be the same again.
We must learn the lessons from our failures. Thousands of lives may depend on it.
And I think what it highlights is that we need to think about elements of national coordination when you are responding to outbreak, alerting and enhancing your surveillance system early on throughout the country, activating all mechanisms that bring together a strong outbreak response.
I see EMS stretchers lining down the block. Jam-packed waiting room filled with 30 to 40 patients next to each other, coughing, giving COVID-19 to one another. There is physically no more room in the emergency room. You bring any more patients in, then you cannot walk. We had a few patients die in the emergency room because the hospital's full.
All I'm seeing are people who are vulnerable, people who are weak, people who are scared. And I'm not gonna lie, it's making me scared.
You hear about people dying and suffering from it, but it's a whole other thing to see this stuff up close.
The proportion of patients that are critically ill, younger, people that look just like us, and older, it's overwhelming. The morgues are already getting overwhelmed.
It just feels like you're standing on the shore looking at a tsunami, and the federal government is offering you a life preserver.
If you get x-rays every few hours on these patients, you tend to see them get worse in real time. You can actually see those cloudy patches increase over the course of 1, 2, 3, 4 hours. I saw a gentleman in his 70s. He looked really well. When I came back the following day to check his chart, he had passed away within the 24-hour period of time.
You know, they're talking to me like I am talking to you, and then a few hours later they go into sudden respiratory arrest. They stop breathing, and they need to be intubated. And this is one of the most dramatic things that I've ever seen.
So let's think about this. The building is on fire. We're all firefighters inside trying to put out this fire, but we're naked, right? Because they didn't protect us. You can see the PPE of other countries, chemical suits, and we are wearing trash bags.
I was told that if I had to intubate anyone, I would be using a sheet protector with 2 industrial-sized paper clips and clipping that to my goggles that we were given.
Did you feel safe wearing that?
Absolutely not. We feel like guidelines are changing not because science recommends they change, but because we just need people and we need warm bodies in the ER.
This is very distressing to me because I don't know if this is going to be the next shift that I go in and I get the virus.
There's nothing that differentiates any of us from the people who become devastatingly sick. And that is, that's scary. I thought I was just out of shape and totally tired from the anxiety of everything that had been going on so quickly. And then I started getting a cough. I was COVID positive. There's a sense of anxiety around the idea that, oh my God, this is positive, and knowing that the disease course is unpredictable.
One of my colleagues had the disease, and we found out that he passed away a week from yesterday, so that's been difficult, and that made it all seem too real.
Everyone's talked about their contingency plans if they did get sick. We've talked about who gets our pets, which is somewhat of an easier discussion than who gets your children.
If all of us are calling out sick, there are no more doctors left. There are no more nurses left. I intubated a nurse the other day from COVID-19.
We're going to be faced with this decision of, we've got 2 patients that need to go on a ventilator or they'll die. We have 1 ventilator. Which one's going on the ventilator?
The idea of splitting a ventilator is a little contentious right now. If you split 1 ventilator for 2 people, you've now taken a tool that gives someone optimal chances of survival and taken that and split that in half. So now 2 people have suboptimal chances of survival. Are you going to put both of those people on that suboptimal tool, risking both of them, or are you going to choose?
I definitely did not go into the practice of medicine to play God, and nor do I want to. I just want to treat people as best I can and take care of as many as I can.
How are they going to live with the guilt after all of this, knowing that if they'd had an equipment that could have saved somebody's life, they would have used it, but because they didn't, they watched somebody die, and they chose person A over person B.
There was one of my colleagues told me this amazing story where he was talking to a patient who was infected. He's talking to this patient and saying, look, if this escalates quickly, would you want a breathing tube? Would you want to be on life support? And the patient said, absolutely, I would want that. And then the patient paused and said, but if someone else needs it, give it to them. The intensive care unit is a busy place pre-COVID. What's different now is that we don't have any visitors in the whole hospital.
The worst part about COVID-19 is that patients die alone without their families by their side. Just imagine that you're dying alone and you're not able to say goodbye one last time to your parent, grandparent, son, daughter, friend, or really anybody you care about.
I seriously starting to think that this is really starting to take a toll on me. Between seeing people die and like having to work 12, 13, 14 hour shifts, it's like really taking a toll on me now.
People are getting tired and worn out, and unfortunately this is just the very, very start of this thing.
I am in a lot of moral distress because I'm not able to help patients the way that I'm accustomed to. I'm simply just trying to mentally stay well enough to take care of them and keep them alive. So that has been a very great moral dilemma for me.
You know, it's just a matter of time before I hear that one of my good friends has passed away because of this, because they were working on the front lines. And that's what terrifies me.
And now we've all kind of resigned ourselves to this is what we do.
The coronavirus pandemic has tanked the global economy with unprecedented speed. Millions out of work, markets plunging, business slammed to a screeching halt. Here's what you need to know to understand this economic turmoil we're living through. The coronavirus pandemic isn't just raising the specter of recession. Economists are worried about the possibility of something even worse.
Everybody stays home for 6 months, then, it's hard it's going to be like the Great Depression.
So what's the difference between a recession and a depression? It comes down to how long the economy contracts. A recession is typically defined as 2 negative quarters of economic growth, and it's part of the normal business cycle. The U.S. economy has fallen into recession more than 30 times since 1854. A depression is something vastly different. It happens when the economic decline is sustained and might potentially go on for years. Now, that's only occurred once in American history in 1929, and it lasted 10 years. Because it lasts so long, a depression is more severe. A decade ago, unemployment hit 10% during the worst of the Great Recession, but during the Great Depression, the jobless rate peaked at nearly 25%. The reason economists are so worried this time, we just don't know how long we'll be fighting this virus. We don't know how long stores will be shut down, how long travel will be paused, how much damage will be done to supply chains, or how many companies will go bankrupt. But there is hope if you look to history. The recession that followed the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic lasted just 7 months. That's much shorter than the average recession. Let's hope this time history repeats.
A record-shattering 6.6 million Americans filed for unemployment last week. That's on top of the 3.3 million who filed the week before. Joining us now, CNN Chief Business Correspondent Christine Roman, CNN anchor and correspondent Julia Chatterley, and CNN White House correspondent John Harwood. Romans, once again, just the top line number, double what it was last week. I think higher than the worst we even expected for this week.
Yeah, it really is a job shock here. And you've got 10 million layoffs or furloughs. That means in just the past couple of weeks, 10 million. It's pointless for me even to make a chart of it for you, John, because it just looks like a geyser going straight up. I'm actually even a little surprised that the state unemployment offices were able to handle this kind of volume. Last week, we know there were so many people filing for unemployment benefits, they weren't even in some cases able to get all of them. Another notable thing about these numbers from the Department of Labor, John, is that the numbers doubled and it has spread from hospitality and restaurants into just about every corner of the economy, including healthcare. The biggest Main Street bailout in history will soon work its way into your bank account, and there are important features for American workers and savers. First, that check, up to $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 for couples, and $500 per child. This is a one-time payment that for most people will be direct deposited into your bank account if you filed tax returns electronically with the government in 2018 and 2019. If you have to wait for a paper check, it could take a little longer. There are also better jobless benefits, an extra $600 a week for up to 4 months, and gig economy workers, the self-employed, are included for the first time. For retirees, required minimum distributions are waived for 2020. That means seniors don't have to take money out of their retirement accounts and take a loss. It gives your nest egg more time to recover if you don't need the money right now. For taxpayers in extreme distress, the CARES Act waives the 10% early withdrawal penalty on distributions from IRA, 401k, and certain retirement accounts and annuities. And if you already have a loan outstanding on your retirement plan and repayment is due this year, you can delay your repayment up to a year. For student loan borrowers, repayment and interest on all federally backed student loans has been suspended for 6 months until September 30th, and the Department of Education can't collect on defaulted loans by garnishing wages or tax returns. Stay at home. It's the mantra of the fight against coronavirus. But as job losses mount, more people are struggling to make payments on those homes. The federal government has taken some action.
What does housing have to do with health? It has everything to do with health.
Evictions and foreclosures are halted for those with federally backed mortgages. The $2 trillion stimulus package includes a 60-day suspension for housing and urban development properties and single-family mortgages insured by the Federal Housing Administration, as well as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. But that's only about 60% of all mortgages. For everyone else, it may come down to a patchwork of stopgap measures. Bank of America announced it would allow customers to defer mortgage payments for those who request it, but other major banks have not yet made such broad assurances. Kansas, California, Indiana, and several other states have suspended all foreclosures and evictions temporarily, while New York ordered a halt on all mortgage payments for the financially distressed for 90 days. And what about the 36% of Americans who rent? The stimulus package includes a direct payment to those who meet certain income requirements, up to $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 for couples, and $500 per child. But a one-time payment won't go very far. That's where the stimulus bill's expanded unemployment insurance comes in. Not only does this jobless insurance pay more and last longer, it also covers independent contractors, gig economy workers, and the self-employed.
What we call unemployment insurance on steroids. It goes longer. That first check is nice, but how are you going to pay the rent, buy the food, and do things in the months after if you're still unemployed? The unemployment lasts for 4 years, and it's larger. It's more money because it pays you, for most workers, their full salaries.
Landlords can seek relief if they have a federally backed loan, but also tenants cannot be evicted for non-payment for 120 days. This applies to some 27,000 properties financed through Freddie Mac. Remember, if you're behind on your rent or mortgage, contact your lender or landlord. Don't wait, work out a plan with them now. And of course, deferred payments mean you'll still have to pay them eventually, while adding on a few months at the end of a 30-year mortgage may be a reasonable solution for renters required to pay back rent. That story could be very different.
I'm worried about having a heart attack, to be perfectly honest with you.
I'm concerned.
The government needs to react and help us get through this. That's the only way it's going to work.
Small businesses have been ravaged by the coronavirus and the economic chaos it has caused. Now the government is ready to help. The stimulus package allocates almost $350 billion for forgivable small business loans. Who is eligible for those funds? Generally, any business with 500 employees or less. That includes independent contractors and sole proprietors. The loans are designed to keep businesses afloat. Businesses are eligible for 2.5 months of payroll costs based on the average cost from last year. And the loans do not have to be paid back as long as owners meet a few conditions. The loan must be used within 2 months and cover payroll, mortgage interest, rent, and utility costs. The recipient can't lay off workers or reduce their pay. If a business has already let workers go, it can use the loan to hire them back. 75% of the money must go to payroll costs. To get the loan, there's a 2-page application that can be filled out online. You can plug your zip code into the Small Business Administration website to find a lender in your area. The White House is promising to move quickly on these funds, but some banks say the details aren't quite worked out yet, and that may cause delays. The money will be given out on a first-come, first-served basis, so visit treasury.gov to get more information and the application. Of course, some big questions remain. Will the funds be enough to keep small business on their feet? And what if the pandemic stretches well into the future? If that happens, the government may need a new package with more capital to help small businesses survive. The U.S. Federal Reserve is battling a coronavirus-fueled recession. It cut interest rates to near zero.
And I want to congratulate the Federal Reserve. It's a big step, and I'm very happy they did it.
Announced unlimited bond buying and injected more liquidity into financial markets. The Fed also says it will purchase commercial mortgage-backed securities. But what if it's not enough? There's some talk about the Fed even buying individual stocks. The central bank would likely need the law changed to allow that. Negative interest rates are another possibility. Other global central banks have gone negative, and President Trump likes the idea. But Fed Chief Jerome Powell has pretty much ruled that out.
We do not see negative policy rates as likely to be an appropriate policy response here in the United States.
There are other unconventional tools the Fed could use. Section 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act grants the central bank emergency powers. Experts argue that includes the authority to lend directly to companies hit by the economic shock of coronavirus. And the Fed says a Main Street lending program for small and medium-sized businesses is coming. Then there's perhaps the last resort, helicopter money. Picture a helicopter flying overhead, throwing cash down on everyone. Former Fed Chief Ben Bernanke famously talked about this in 2002. Under this scenario, the government makes money directly available to consumers to spend, but it doesn't pay for it by borrowing, which adds to the deficit. Instead, it's paid for by the Fed, which essentially prints money. It's a theoretical idea, never done before, but if the Fed's actions up to now don't work, the governments around the world could move to grant central banks new powers. How quickly can the economy recover from coronavirus? A lot depends on what shape this recession takes. There's an alphabet soup of possibilities: the V shape, the U shape, or the dreaded L shape. A V shape is the best case scenario here. It's a sharp drop followed by an equally sharp recovery. It means the economy would ramp back up just as quickly as it shut down. But that will largely depend on how quickly the virus is contained and how soon people can go back to work. That's why a U-shaped recovery may be more likely here. In that case, the economy contracts, then bumps along the bottom for a while before climbing back. Many economists are betting on that scenario since uncertainty caused by the virus won't just evaporate overnight. Business owners and CEOs may curtail future investment, and consumer spending, the biggest driver of U.S. economic activity, probably won't bounce back immediately either. That's partly because of lost income, but also because of the psychological toll the viral outbreak has taken on consumer confidence. Beyond the V and the U, there's the worst case scenario, the L shape. Picture a hockey stick with a long tail. That happens if the virus is not contained, social distancing remains into the summer, and businesses and consumers take years to recover. After the Great Recession, economic activity took nearly 4 years to return to its pre-recession peak. The Great Depression was even more severe, lasting 10 years. Thankfully, most economists are not predicting this outcome, but all of this is highly...
Hey, I care about you. I don't want you exposed. So again, I'm telling you, this is it right here. Y'all gotta take care of each other. If you're sick, go home. Don't come in.
Look, our people are no different than anybody else. They're no different than the police officers and the firefighters. They're putting themselves out there to potentially be exposed, more than the people that are staying at home.
You all know as well as I do, you got a hard job. You are just like every other first responder right now.
I pray that none of us get sick. We out there in it. They want you 6 feet distance. In the truck, we not 6 feet distance. We just gotta make sure we keep ourselves, all three of us keep ourselves up. And if one of us sick, don't come in. Like, spare the next person.
I just want to let y'all know this is serious, you know what I'm saying? I just lost my son this morning with coronavirus, and I'm here. He live in Detroit, he just passed away, 32 years old, you know?
I mean, right now, it's a scare, it's more responsibility, because you never know if you're gonna be sick, maybe. So it's scary, but it's a job that we gotta do it too.
The worst thing in the world would be that we're going on with this virus out there in this city and the trash ain't getting up.
The true danger is to our people in this right now is that they still have to come in, they still have to be around and in close proximity to more people, and that's the danger in this virus, right? Get that social distancing, and our folks may not have the liberty to do that every day, all day.
Wednesday, I'll have the plan from Earl for y'all to work modified tours of duty.
We give them the masks, they put the masks on, get in the truck, windows down, try to keep some airflow going on in there so it's not, we're lessening as much as we can any exposure they'll have from each other. And really at this point, that's the best we can do with our folks in the vehicles.
We do recycle on Capitol Hill. It's a big road. You come with us? Yeah. Okay.
You got time for me to get some nap?
When I came in the morning, let me tell you what happened. I got my staff to clean the truck before they get in. I clean the truck We got hand sanitizer. We really need more hand sanitizer. We got masks, we got gloves, we got everything. So we're trying to be the safe possible.
Additional weeks, local officials say the number of new coronavirus cases still remains enough of a concern to extend the social distancing restrictions imposed to slow the spread of the potentially deadly respiratory disease in Italy. Nearly 100,000 people have been infected in a span of just 5 weeks in Italy, caused only by the United States.
I do take pride in my job because if I don't do it, then who gonna do it? Somebody gotta be the one to go out there and get it. That's a must. The trash must continue to get up. I don't know, somebody just left on the can. Okay, thank you to our wonderful recycling crew. We appreciate you so much. My job don't stop. I gotta go to work, rain, sleet, or snow. I gotta be out there. I know it's a virus out there, but I just gotta make sure I do to protect myself, you know? Because people losing their lives off of it. This is something new to me. I try not to think about it.
Good morning. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. As of last night, we now have 401 confirmed cases in Washington, D.C., and sadly, 9 deaths. Our message remains the same. Stay home.
Can't collect the trash through the internet. We got to be out there on the ground. That's our job. Collecting trash is a pass-fail business, right? You either did or you didn't. There's no in between. And our guys feel that every day and making sure they're getting through their routes and they're getting every can, they're putting the cans back where they go, and they're doing that work. You know, that fails, and that truly is to society a failure of society, a failure of government. And we're not gonna let that happen.
We almost finished. This is about the last of the route. We got like one more alley and like 3 more fronts, and then we'll be all finished to go back to the dump.
It's really important job, really very important job. So sometimes people, they don't see it because we're in the alley. So a lot of people, they see a job like, oh, the trash man. So it's in some kind of demeaning, but it's a job.
I pray it bypass soon. It be over with. It's another lesson. They gotta believe and trust in God, because nothing we could do, nothing nobody could do about it. Until that day, I will still be out there collecting your recycling and trash. We knew what we signed up for when we applied for the job. We knew we had to be essential workers. In case of emergency, we gotta be here.
A lot of people, a lot of my coworkers, they're all scared. Even I feel like it's a scary part because it's the first time I've seen something like that. I've never seen something like that in my life. But thanks God we got a job right here. So right now it's a really dangerous job, but we gotta keep going.
Happening right now, garbage could be piling up across the city as sanitation workers are refusing to go to work. Some of them tell KDKA they're not being given enough protective gear as the coronavirus continues to spread in our area. Nicole Ford explains what the workers want to see changed.
This parking lot packed this morning with men and women you typically see on those trucks. As the threat of the coronavirus grows, they have a list of demands for the city before they continue keeping our city clean. In a sea of yellow and orange.
I say if we don't pick up your rubbish, what are you going to do with it?
Emotions were high as dozens of sanitation workers for the city of Pittsburgh refused to go to work on Wednesday.
We are risking our lives as well. We can be contaminated as well. They're saying keep social distance. It's too late for that.
Deemed essential employees during the statewide shutdown, Sheldon White tells us the least the city could do is give the workers the protection needed to do their job.
We want better equipment, protective gear. We have no masks. We want hazard pay.
Their concerns over the spreading coronavirus continue to rise. Tom Foley says one worker's wife is now quarantined and they were never notified.
And there's several people here that are diabetic, including myself. So if I catch this, I could die. Me too. And there's a bunch of people. How many guys are diabetic here, man?
As these workers wait for answers, they're looking to the mayor, who they say said the trash will always be picked up. After nearly 2 hours, the workers were sent home with pay as their union rep talks out where to go next.
Let them do their job for us.
A union rep tells us there will be no trash pickup in the city of Pittsburgh today, but we're still working to find out what that means for people at home who had a scheduled pickup for Wednesday. In the Strip District, Nicole Ford, KDKA News.
All the patients in this room, all the feet that you see, they all have COVID. The frustrating thing about all of this is it really just feels like it's too little too late. Like we knew it was coming.
Today is kind of getting worse and worse. We had to get a refrigerated truck to store the bodies of patients who are dying. We are right now scrambling to try to get a few additional ventilators or even CPAP machines. If we could get CPAP machines, we could free up ventilators for patients who need them.
Five ventilators. Oh my God.
You know, we now have these 5 vents. We probably, unless people die, I suspect we'll be back to needing to beg for ventilators again in another day or 2. There's a mythical 100 vents out there, which we haven't seen. Leaders in various offices, from the president to the head of health and hospitals, saying things like, we're going to be fine, everything's fine. And from our perspective, everything is not fine. I don't have the support that I need and even just the materials that I need physically to take care of my patients. And it's America. And we're supposed to be a first world country. On a regular day, my emergency department's volume is pretty high. It's about 200 people a day. Now we're seeing 400 or more people a day. At first, we were trying to isolate patients with cough and fever and be more careful around them, but we weren't necessarily being extra careful around all the other patients. And then we started to realize that patients who were coming in with no fever but abdominal pain actually had findings on their x-rays and chest CTs that were consistent with this coronavirus, COVID-19. So someone in a car accident gets brought in, and we get a CT scan of them, and their lungs look like they have coronavirus. We were seeing a lot of patients who probably had COVID, but we didn't realize. 10 residents and also many of our nurses and a few of the attending physicians got sick. The anxiety of this situation is really overwhelming. You know, all of the doctors, it's hard for us to get tested even if we want to, even if we have symptoms. We're exposed over and over again. We don't have the protective equipment that we should have. I put on one N95 mask in the morning. I need to have that N95 mask on for every patient I see. I don't take it off all day. The N95 mask I wore today is also the N95 mask I wore on Friday. We're always worried that we'll be out of N95 masks. What's a little bit scary now is the patients that we're getting are much sicker. Many of the young people who are getting sick don't smoke. They're healthy. They have no comorbidities. They're just young, regular people between the ages of 30 and 50 who you would not expect to get this sick. So many people are saying it's going to be okay, everything's fine, we have what we need. And if this goes on for a month or 2 or 3 or 5 like it did in China, and we're already this strained, we don't have what we need. I don't really care if I get in trouble for speaking to the media. I want people to know that this is bad. People are dying. We don't have the tools that we need in the emergency department and in the hospital to take care of them. And it's really hard.